A New York judge on Friday ordered Donald Trump to pay $354.9 million in penalties for duping and defrauding lenders for more than a decade. Capping off the massive civil fines, Justice Arthur Engoron also banned Trump from serving as an officer or director of any New York corporation for 3 years. The massive penalty is the result of a civil lawsuit against Trump brought by New York Attorney General Letitia James, who accused the former president and his family business of falsely inflating his net worth by billions of dollars in order to fool bankers into lending him money at lower rates.
This is a witch hunt, the likes of which probably nobody has ever seen.
Trump has denied wrongdoing and called the case a political vendetta by James, an elected Democrat. Trump is expected to appeal Friday's ruling by Engoron.
Hey family, welcome back. Adam with you once again. A New York judge ordered Trump to pay $355 million in a civil fraud case, calling his conduct shocking the conscience, while federal courts blocked major executive orders on elections and energy policy. Though survivable, the cumulative weight of these judicial defeats is staggering, hitting his finances, his business, his agenda, and his image. The penalties were substantial. Trump was ordered to pay approximately $355 million. Let that number sink in for a moment. That is not a fine that can be paid with pocket change. That is a sum large enough to threaten the financial stability of his entire business empire. Beyond the monetary judgment, Engoron imposed years of independent monitoring over the Trump Organization. He sharply restricted how the company can do business in New York, one of its primary markets. A compliance monitor was placed over operations to ensure ongoing transparency.
And now to that major penalty for Donald Trump in the civil fraud case against him.
The judge ordering the former president to pay hundreds of millions of dollars for lying about the value of his real estate portfolio. He is also barred from doing business in New York State for the next 3 years. CBS 2's Dick Brennan live at Trump Tower with what comes next. Dick.
Yeah, the big question, Maurice and Christine, what comes next? Now, Donald Trump loves to say that he knows business better than anyone, and he's got his name plastered over buildings all across the city. But now, because of a lawsuit, he may have to come up with some serious cash. Donald Trump, it's a stunning blow to his treasured bottom line. A judge's decision puts his entire New York business empire in jeopardy.
The scale and the scope of Donald Trump's fraud is staggering. And so too is his ego and his belief that the rules do not apply to him.
In addition to the giant financial penalty, Trump is barred for 3 years from running his business or any other in New York. His sons Don Jr. and Eric were ordered to pay $4 million and are also barred from business for 2 years.
Court supervision was extended to prevent the continuation of fraudulent practices. These restrictions affect Trump's ability to operate his business freely in ways that will last long after the headlines fade. The fraud ruling matters because it hits Trump's personal finances and business brand simultaneously. His self-image as a successful businessman has been central to his political identity from the very beginning. It is the foundation of everything he has built his public persona on. A judicial finding of persistent fraud, conduct that shocks the conscience, contradicts that narrative completely. The financial penalties and operational restrictions constrain his business activities in concrete ways. This is a serious blow to Trump the businessman, even if it doesn't directly affect Trump the president. More recent setbacks have targeted his policy agenda rather than his personal finances. A federal judge blocked most of Trump's executive order targeting vote-by-mail states. The order had attempted to pressure or punish states over their election rules. It was part of Trump's broader effort to reshape election administration and challenge voting methods he had repeatedly and falsely claimed enabled fraud.
New at 11, a federal judge blocking major parts of the president's executive order to crack down on mail-in voting. The order sought to create a federal voter list and limit who can receive a mail ballot. This morning, a judge sided with a coalition of nearly 24 states that challenged the order, saying the Constitution gives states and Congress the power to set election rules, not the president. Records show President Trump himself has voted by mail, despite saying in March, quote, "Mail-in voting means mail-in cheating," end quote.
The judicial bloc sharply limited his ability to use federal power against state election decisions. The policy tool he tried to create was largely neutralized. Around the same time, another federal judge ruled that the administration's attempt to halt a major offshore wind project was unlawful. The Revolution Wind Project, a multi-billion-dollar renewable energy development, had been stopped by Trump administration action. The court ruled that stoppage was illegal and allowed the project to resume. Trump's effort to block green energy development through executive power was overturned. His policy agenda suffered another defeat through judicial review. These rulings hit Trump in different but cumulatively significant ways.
A Massachusetts federal judge struck down President Donald Trump's executive order that revokes permits for new offshore wind farms.
The president issued the order in January, which halted all leasing of federal lands and waters for new wind farms. His action came after 4 states had plans in the works to build more than a dozen large wind farms in the Atlantic Ocean. In response, a coalition of 17 states, including Maine, went to court in May to challenge the president's order. The White House, in a response to the New York Times, said the executive order would have green-lighted a federal study of offshore wind projects to determine if they raised energy costs for Americans. Maine's Attorney General Aaron Frey issuing a statement following the court's decision on this. He writes in part, quote, "Mainers care about protecting our environment. Whatever the federal administration's position is on wind power, it does not have the right to arbitrarily ban development of this sustainable energy resource," end quote.
The fraud judgment affects his personal wealth and business operations. The election order block limits his leverage over states. The wind project ruling constrains his energy policy. Together, they represent a pattern of courts rejecting Trump's conduct and blocking his priorities. Commentary channels bundle these rulings together, calling them the blows he feared most because they affect his finances, his brand, his policy tools, and his ability to pressure opponents. The fatal blow framing captures something real about how damaging these rulings are while overstating their actual effect. A $355 million judgment is devastating for most people and businesses. Judicial monitoring of your company is humiliating and constraining. Having your executive orders blocked undermines your policy agenda. These are serious consequences, but they don't end Trump's presidency. They don't strip him of political power. They don't remove him from office. Fatal suggests something that kills. These rulings hurt Trump without killing his presidency. Trump has also benefited from judicial rulings in ways that complicate the picture. The Supreme Court's immunity decision granted presidents broad protection for official acts. This ruling helps Trump by limiting what conduct can form the basis of criminal prosecution. Some of what he did while president may be immune from accountability, regardless of how clearly it might otherwise constitute crimes. The immunity ruling didn't deliver everything Trump wanted, but it provided significant protection that benefits him in ongoing legal battles. The overall picture is mixed rather than one-directional. Trump has suffered major civil judgments that affect his finances and business. He's faced injunctions blocking parts of his agenda. He's also received immunity protections that shield some of his conduct from prosecution. The legal system is producing both defeats and victories for Trump. Fatal blow language focuses on the defeats while ignoring the protections. The complete picture requires acknowledging both. Let me break down exactly what each major ruling accomplished, what limits it actually placed on Trump, and why the cumulative pattern matters, even though no single decision ends his political power. To really understand what judicial defeats Trump has suffered and why they matter, we need to examine each major ruling in detail. What courts found, what penalties or restrictions they imposed, and what practical effects those decisions have. The picture that emerges shows significant damage to Trump's finances, business operations, and policy agenda without producing the fatal blow that dramatic framing suggests. The New York fraud case is the most financially consequential ruling against Trump and the one most often referenced in blow content. The case was brought by New York Attorney General Letitia James, alleging that Trump, his adult sons, and the Trump Organization had systematically committed fraud over many years by inflating asset values on financial statements used to obtain loans and insurance. Judge Engoron's ruling found that Trump and his companies had engaged in persistent fraud. This wasn't a close call or a narrow finding. Engoron wrote that the fraud shocks the conscience, language that conveys how egregious he found the conduct. The judge concluded that Trump had repeatedly lied about the value of his assets, claiming properties were worth far more than their actual value to obtain favorable treatment from banks and insurers. The specific findings were damning. Trump had inflated the value of his Mar-a-Lago property, his penthouse apartment, his golf courses, and other holdings. The discrepancies between claimed values and actual values were enormous. Not minor exaggerations, but massive misrepresentations. Financial statements provided to banks contained valuations that bore little relationship to reality. The fraud was systematic and ongoing, not a one-time error or isolated incident. The financial penalty was approximately $355 million. This sum represents disgorgement of ill-gotten gains, money Trump obtained through fraud that the court ordered returned. The amount is substantial enough to strain even significant wealth. It requires liquidating assets, restructuring finances, and fundamentally affects the financial position of Trump and his businesses. Beyond the monetary judgment, Engoron imposed structural restrictions that affect how Trump can operate going forward. An independent compliance monitor was placed over the Trump Organization to ensure accurate financial reporting. This means outside oversight of business operations, with the monitor having access to records and authority to flag problems. Court supervision was extended for years, meaning ongoing judicial involvement in business activities rather than freedom to operate without scrutiny. Engoron also restricted how the Trump Organization can do business in New York. These restrictions limit the company's ability to obtain loans, enter certain transactions, and operate as freely as it previously did in one of its primary markets. For a company headquartered in New York with extensive real estate holdings there, restrictions on New York business activities are particularly significant. The fraud case affects Trump the businessman more than Trump the president. The financial penalties and operational restrictions constrain his business activities, but don't directly limit presidential power. He can serve as president while paying fraud judgments and operating under court supervision. The damages are to his personal wealth, his business operations, and his reputation as a successful businessman, not to his constitutional authority as president. The more recent rulings against Trump's policy agenda operate differently. They directly block presidential action rather than penalizing past business conduct. The election executive order ruling addressed Trump's attempt to use federal power against states with vote-by-mail systems. The order had sought to pressure or punish states over their election rules, potentially threatening federal funding or other consequences for states that made voting more accessible. The federal judge who blocked most of this order found it exceeded presidential authority and violated constitutional principles of federalism. States have broad control over their own election administration under the Constitution. Presidential attempts to override or punish state election decisions face significant legal obstacles. The ruling sharply limited Trump's ability to use the tools he tried to create for pressuring states over voting methods. This ruling matters for Trump's broader agenda because election administration has been a priority issue for him. He's consistently claimed without evidence that expanded mail voting enables fraud. His executive order attempted to create federal pressure against states using such methods. The judicial bloc neutralized this policy tool. He can continue making rhetorical arguments about mail voting, but his ability to impose federal consequences on states was largely eliminated by the ruling. The offshore wind ruling addressed a different policy priority: Trump's opposition to renewable energy development. The Revolution Wind project off Rhode Island represented a major investment in offshore wind power. The Trump administration had taken action to halt the project, attempting to use federal authority to stop development. The administration opposed on policy grounds. The federal judge ruled that the administration's halt was unlawful. The court found that proper procedures hadn't been followed, that legal requirements hadn't been met, or that the action otherwise violated law. The ruling allowed the multi-billion-dollar project to resume despite Trump's efforts to stop it. His ability to block renewable energy through executive action was constrained by judicial review, finding his methods illegal. These policy rulings illustrate how courts can check presidential power. Trump can issue executive orders and direct agency action, but those actions must comply with law. When courts find executive action unlawful, they can block implementation. Trump faces ongoing judicial review of his agenda with mixed results. Some actions upheld, others blocked. The rulings cited in blow content represent the blocks, not the full picture that includes actions courts have permitted. The Supreme Court's immunity ruling operates in Trump's favor and complicates the blow narrative. The court established that presidents have absolute immunity for core constitutional functions and presumptive immunity for other official conduct. Only unofficial personal acts can be freely prosecuted. This framework significantly limits what past conduct can form the basis of criminal charges against Trump. The immunity ruling doesn't help Trump with civil fraud judgments. Business activities aren't official presidential acts, but it does help him with criminal exposure from his time in office. Prosecutors face significant new obstacles in bringing charges related to presidential conduct. Some allegations that previously seemed prosecutable may now be protected. The ruling was a significant victory for Trump, even as he was suffering defeats elsewhere. The cumulative picture shows Trump weakened in some areas while protected in others. Civil fraud judgments constrain his finances and business. Policy order blocks limit his agenda implementation. Criminal immunity protections shield some of his conduct from prosecution. The legal system is producing mixed results rather than one-directional defeat. Fatal blow framing focuses on the defeats while ignoring the victories. So let me bring this all together and talk about what these judicial defeats actually accomplish and why understanding their real effects matters more than dramatic fatal blow framing. The key insight is that Trump has suffered serious legal setbacks that affect his finances, business, and policy agenda without producing the knockout that ends his presidency or strips his power. The New York fraud judgment is genuinely devastating in financial and reputational terms. $355 million in penalties represents an enormous sum. Court supervision and compliance monitoring impose ongoing oversight on business operations. Restrictions on New York business activities constrain where and how the Trump organization can operate. The finding that his conduct shocks the conscience damages the successful businessman narrative central to his political identity. The policy defeats limit Trump's ability to implement his agenda through executive action. Blocked election orders can't pressure states over voting methods. Overturned wind project halts can't stop renewable energy development. Courts checking executive power demonstrate that presidential action faces limits when it violates law. Trump can keep trying to advance his agenda, but judicial review creates obstacles he must navigate. Here is what I think is really important about understanding these rulings in context. They hurt Trump genuinely and significantly without ending his presidency. He remains in office. He continues exercising presidential power. He keeps fighting in court and through executive action. The rulings constrain without defeating. They weaken without destroying. Fatal blow language implies an ending that hasn't occurred. The pattern across these rulings shows courts willing to rule against Trump when they find legal violations. The fraud case found systematic dishonesty over many years. The policy blocks found executive overreach or procedural failures. Judges have demonstrated they'll reject Trump's conduct when it crosses legal lines. That willingness to rule against a president is significant for rule of law, even when individual rulings don't end his power. The immunity ruling complicates the picture by operating in Trump's favor. Broad protection for official presidential conduct helps Trump avoid criminal accountability for actions during his presidency. This victory gets less attention in blow narratives focused on his defeats, but it's part of the same legal system producing mixed results. Trump wins some cases and loses others. The complete picture includes both. The emotional language of content claiming fatal blows captures audience attention more effectively than accurate description of mixed legal results. Loses it and delivers fatal blow, promise dramatic consequences that feel satisfying to Trump critics. They're also misleading about what's actually happening. Trump faces serious but survivable legal challenges. His presidency continues despite significant defeats. The reality is less dramatic than the framing. For people following Trump's legal situation, watching what rulings actually accomplish provides clearer understanding than dramatic commentary. Does a ruling remove him from office? Does it strip presidential authority? Does it block his entire agenda or just parts? Does it bankrupt him or just impose financial stress? These concrete effects matter more than emotional characterizations. Fatal has a meaning, something that kills. And these rulings don't meet that standard. The appeals process adds another layer of complexity. Trump is appealing the New York fraud judgment through state courts. He may or may not succeed in reducing or overturning the ruling. Policy rulings face their own appeals. The legal battles continue rather than ending with initial rulings. What looks like a fatal blow at one stage might be modified or reversed later. The story isn't finished. The comparison between what rulings accomplish and what fatal blow language suggests illuminates the gap. Rulings accomplish financial penalties, business restrictions, policy blocks, ongoing litigation. Fatal blow language suggests ending destruction, defeat so complete it terminates political power. The gap between these is why the framing misleads. Real consequences exist without matching the dramatic characterization. Trump's continued ability to govern despite these rulings shows their limits. He issues new executive orders after old ones are blocked. He appeals judgments while continuing business operations. He exercises presidential power while fighting legal battles. A president facing genuine fatal blows wouldn't continue functioning this way. The ongoing operation demonstrates that serious isn't the same as fatal. The cumulative effect of multiple defeats matters even without any single fatal blow. Financial penalties add up. Blocked policies represent failed agenda items. Court time and legal fees drain resources. Judicial findings of fraud and unlawful conduct damage reputation. The accumulation of setbacks weakens Trump, even if no single setback ends his presidency. Death by 1,000 cuts is different from a fatal blow, but can still be significant. The bottom line is that Trump has suffered serious judicial defeats. The fraud judgment, the policy blocks, the ongoing litigation that affect his finances, business, and agenda without delivering the fatal blow that ends his presidency. He remains in office and continues fighting. The rulings hurt without killing. Understanding this helps evaluate both the significance of what's happened and the limitations of dramatic framing that overstates consequences. But let me go even deeper into why these rulings matter so much, even without being fatal. The fraud case, for example, didn't just hit Trump's wallet. It struck at the very foundation of his public identity. For decades, Trump has sold himself as the ultimate winner, the guy who always comes out on top, the business genius who knows how to play the game better than anyone else. That image has been central to his political appeal. His supporters see him as someone who succeeded against all odds, who built an empire through sheer will and intelligence. The fraud ruling undermines that entire narrative. Judge Engoron didn't just say Trump made mistakes in his financial reporting. He said Trump engaged in persistent fraud that shocks the conscience. That is the kind of language that sticks. It is the kind of finding that follows you around for the rest of your life. When historians write about Trump, they will have to reckon with the fact that a judge found him to be a fraudster who systematically lied about his wealth. That is a legacy-defining finding. It transforms Trump from a controversial political figure into someone who was legally determined to have engaged in deception on a massive scale. The $355 million judgment is bad enough on its own, but the reputational damage is arguably worse. Trump has always claimed to be the most successful businessman ever to run for president. That claim is now officially in question. A court of law found that his success was built on lies. That is devastating in a way that goes far beyond money. The policy defeats are significant in a different way. They show that Trump's power as president has real limits. He can issue executive orders all day long, but if those orders violate the law, courts will block them. The election order ruling was particularly important because it addressed one of Trump's signature issues. He has spent years claiming without evidence that mail voting is riddled with fraud. He has used that claim to justify all kinds of actions, from lawsuits to public statements to executive orders. The federal judge who blocked his order found that he was overstepping his authority. That ruling didn't just stop one policy. It sent a message that Trump cannot use the presidency to bully states into changing their election procedures. That matters for the future of American democracy. It matters for the integrity of elections. It matters for the balance of power between the federal government and the states. The Wind Project ruling sent a similar message about energy policy. Trump has made no secret of his opposition to renewable energy. He has called climate change a hoax. He has tried to roll back environmental regulations and promote fossil fuels. The Revolution Wind Project represented a major investment in clean energy. When Trump tried to stop it, the court said no. The ruling found that his administration's methods were unlawful. That means Trump cannot simply block renewable energy projects because he doesn't like them. He has to follow the law. He has to follow proper procedures. He cannot just wave his hand and make things disappear. That is